At noon, I walked into the field office with my binder and the deed copies in a plain brown envelope. Fluorescence hummed. The waiting chairs were empty. Hayes met me with a recorder and a legal pad and let me talk without interruption for 46 minutes. When I finished, she tapped the deed clause with her pen. "This is going to play well," she said, and not because it was flashy, because it was quiet and lawful and inarguable. "Play it loud," I said. "For the neighbors, not for me." The next weeks moved like good machinery, slow enough to be sure, steady enough to trust. Subpoenas went out. Forensic accountants came in. The clubhouse office filled with box fans and dust masks and soft curses as people discovered what rot looks like when you open the wall. Karen's emails read like a hymn to control. The bankers' memos were smug until the numbers turned desperate. The yes men had nothing in their sent folders but one-word approvals. The fake cops had a contract written in a font you'd use for a high school flyer. Everything about them screamed, pretend. The first court appearance was set for a Wednesday at 9 a.m. The courtroom smelled like varnished wood and old paper. I wore a suit that still fit the past life people kept accusing me of embellishing. It felt more like armor than costume. Karen was brought in through the side door. No pearls, no white suit this time, just county-issue humility. She scanned the benches and stopped at me. Hatred is loud, so is panic. She was both. The U.S. attorney read the counts: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, extortion under color of official right, impersonation of a law enforcement officer, money laundering. The room didn't gasp, it tightened. When the judge asked for plea, Karen's voice came out like a receipt. Not guilty. Her attorney squeezed her elbow like that would turn the words into protection. It never does. Sentencing would be months away. Process takes time. But between arraignment and trial, something else happened. The neighborhood began to change, like soil turned over to let air in. The receiver announced an amnesty day. Bring your fines, bring your liens, bring your letters. We'll audit, forgive the fraudulent, and reimburse what can be repaid from seized funds once restitution is ordered. We set up folding tables in the clubhouse. A line formed before the doors opened. People brought stacks of paper bound with rubber bands and dread. We broke them open and told the truth page by page. Mrs. Hahn came first, spine straight, eyes worse for wear but still burning steady. "They fined me because my nephew's car had an oil spot," she said, laying down 3 letters. I scrubbed till midnight. "It's done," I said. "These don't exist anymore." I stamped void in red across the top copy and slid the original into an evidence folder. When she left, lighter by 100 pounds of imagined shame, something like applause rippled from the line without anyone clapping. Mr. Reynolds came with a shoebox. Inside, receipts and threats and a photo of his fence the day Karen called it, structurally alarming. The fence pictured stood as straight as a salute. I stamped void on his fines and wrote a note to the receiver myself: expedite reimbursement. He nodded like a soldier excused from needless duty. The chalk kid toddled in dragging a dinosaur backpack. He pointed to the clubhouse floor and asked, "Can I draw?" His mother nearly cried when I said yes. He knelt and chalked a rocket that went from baseboard to baseboard, then added stars that trailed into the hallway. When Karen used to walk in, people stared at their shoes. When that little boy finished, everyone stared up. The board, what was left of it, dissolved under the receiver's stare. Elections would come later. For now there would be rules that were actually rules, not weapons. There would be budgets that were arithmetic, not appetite. Neighbors volunteered to scrub graffiti stickers off windows that never should have had them. We hired a real landscaping company with real insurance and no magnetic decals. At 6:07 p.m. on a Friday, I stood at my driveway where they'd once parked sideways to block me in. A city truck had just finished painting the curb numbers fresh, a small square symbol that life had edges, and those edges were respected. The young couple wheeled a grill onto their lawn and pretended it was just a normal cookout as neighbors casually brought over plates. It turned into a potluck without invitations. I brought iced tea, and the sort of quiet a room needs to believe what it's seeing. The question came eventually, because it always does: will you take the presidency? People asked in different words. The title they meant was sheriff. I said no every time. The best revenge against a tyrant isn't a new tyrant. It's a neighborhood that doesn't need one. Instead, I wrote a draft code of conduct that fit on one page. Fines shall be a last resort, never a first threat. Any enforcement action must cite a specific verifiable clause. No anonymity. Every notice signed and dated with a name you can face. 48-hour cooling-off period on any complaint that isn't safety critical. No board member shall profit from a vendor relationship. Any security contractor must be licensed, bonded and approved by 2/3 of owners after a public hearing. Simple light. Cockroaches hate it. We held a town hall to read it aloud. I stood off to the side, not at the podium. People argued, good arguments, the kind that mean you're alive and paying attention. We adjusted, sharpened, added a clause mandating quarterly open books. We built something sturdier than outrage, a habit. When the trial finally came, summer had thinned into fall. Leaves on Lakeside Estates turned the kind of honest color you can't fake with paint. I took the stand without feeling the old adrenaline spike. This wasn't undercover work, this was daylight. The prosecutor led me through the chain, the notices, the harassment, the fake SUV, the money flow, the deed. We played the audio from the emergency meeting where Karen called me a cancer and ordered her men to arrest me. Her attorney objected, overruled. The jury watched the video from my porch, cheap badges, plastic zip ties and my badge, real weight, real law, catching the morning sun. You could see in the jurors' eyes the moment the story made a shape they believed. Karen's turn to testify came late on a Tuesday. She tried to paint herself as a guardian, a mother of the neighborhood, a martyr crucified by ingratitude. But cross-examination is a blade, and she brought tissue paper to a sword fight. When the prosecutor put the bank statements on the screen, when the SPA charges lined up with the spike in fines, when Wellington Community Services showed purchase orders for magnetic decals and community enforcement uniforms, the poetry died in her throat. She stepped down smaller than she walked up. The verdict wasn't a surprise. Guilty on wire fraud, guilty on extortion under color of official right, guilty on conspiracy, guilty on impersonation. The banker flipped and pled to lesser counts with a cooperation deal that dripped regret only after math did. The yes men took pleas. The fake cops drew sentences long enough to learn what uniforms really mean. Sentencing day at 4 p.m., the judge read numbers that measured years, not fines. He ordered restitution. He appointed a monitor. He said a line I've heard 100 ways in 100 rooms: authority is not a costume. The quote landed. The room exhaled. Karen stared at the table like she'd finally met something she couldn't instruct. I gave a victim statement. I didn't make it personal. Personal is small. Your Honor, I said, justice isn't just about punishing theft. It's about restoring what fear took from a community trust. We need repayments, yes. But we also need rules that hold and daylight that stays on. He nodded. He'd heard enough anger for a lifetime. He appreciated a plan. The checks didn't come all at once. They came in envelopes with government seals and dry language. People opened them at kitchen tables and cried like you do when someone finally says, "I'm sorry," even if the mouth saying it is a stamp. Mr. Reynolds used his to replace the board on his fence that had a knot he'd always meant to fix. Mrs. Hahn bought her nephew new tires and a charcoal grill. The chalk kid got a bulk pack of colors that could finish a runway. On a clear Saturday, we held a block gathering that had no agenda and no speeches. Someone set up a projector and played a movie on a sheet taped to the garage. Kids ran in the beams like ghosts. I walked the perimeter the way you do when your body isn't sure it's allowed to relax. It took a few laps, but the message finally landed. Stand down, stand by your neighbors instead. The HOA elections came and went like a weather report. The new board won by landslide, not because they were charming but because they were specific. Their platform fit on my one-page code plus a budget everyone could read in a single coffee. I voted, then left the meeting before anyone could ask me to chair a committee. I'm good at this, but I don't need to keep proving it. That's freedom too. One evening just before the time the lake goes all copper, the young mother and her son came by with a gift bag. Inside was a framed drawing. The rocket again, this time with a small figure on the porch holding a coffee cup. The boy had drawn stars around the figure's head. Those are badges, he said. Like the morning, I hung it in my hallway where I see it every night on my way to bed. People will tell you justice is blind. It's not. It sees exactly who's been small too long and who needs to be shrunk to size. Around 7:12 p.m. that night, I stood at the edge of the lawn where they'd once stuck an orange sticker that said "Property under enforcement review." I remembered the sound of its paper tearing free. I remembered the weight of my binder, the feel of the badge in my palm, the look on a bully's face when the room stops agreeing with them. Across the street, the chalk kid started a new drawing, a house with a smile, windows like eyes, a front door that wasn't afraid of knocks. Mr. Reynolds paused on his walk and saluted me with his cane. Mrs. Hahn waved from her porch with tongs in one hand, calling me over to try dumplings. The air smelled like dinner and dignity. I didn't win. We did. That's the part tyrants never understand. Power isn't a chair you sit in. It's a circle you stand in with others. And when one of us steps out to speak, the rest have to lean in, not look away. If you've ever taken your neighborhood back from bullies, HOA, bossy board, or any loudmouth with a clipboard, what was the first rule you rewrote and why? Drop it in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Your answer might be the light someone else needs on their street. We'll need statements. Yours, theirs, the board. She said the last word like you say a nail before you pull it. Karen tried one more time, because Karens always do. You can't come after a board. We're protected. By whom? I asked softly. The people you defrauded. I let the pause hang, or the bylaws you butchered. Hayes' team moved with the patience of people who understand that time favors the prepared. The tall one read his rights in tones meant to be braver than he felt. The shorter one stopped whispering. Karen's sunglasses went back on one last shield between her and the world that was finally looking back. I gathered my binder while the street rearranged itself around reality. The pages were warm from the morning sun. Evidence feels different in your hands when it's about to mean something. Hayes walked over, eyes scanning the tabs I'd made. Sickles, badges, money, victims. You do clean work, she said. I've had practice. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. You could have called sooner, she added. I could have, I said, but then we'd only have scared them, not stopped them. She considered that, then nodded. We'll coordinate with the U.S. attorney. There's a lot here. Anyone else on the board we should know about? 2 who sign without reading, 1 who reads and signs anyway. I said, you'll find their names. She gave a small nod and turned away. The sedan's trunks opened. Evidence kits, folders, the quiet machinery of justice. Neighbors began to drift toward me. Not too close, a respectful radius of relief and curiosity. A woman with a stroller wiped her eyes and pretended it was just the morning air. They fined me for chalk drawings, she said. Not quite to me, not quite to herself. My little boy's rockets, said it was graffiti. Keep the rockets, I said. We'll take the fines, Mr. Reynolds touched my arm. Thought I'd die before I saw someone tell them no. You told them when you kept your head up, I said. You just needed someone to say it louder. For years I'd walked into rooms where fear set the furniture. Boardrooms, back rooms, motel rooms with peeling wallpaper. The thing about fear is it teaches you to bow. The thing about authority is it loves bowed heads. But that morning, on a neat little street with blue hydrangeas and American flags, heads lifted. Karen called out one last time, a voice brittle with a kind of desperation you can't buy your way out of. You're ruining this community. I turned. No, I said. Not angry, not triumphant, just true. You did. I'm rebuilding it. She flinched like truth had edges. Hayes signaled, and the scene shifted toward paperwork and process. The adrenaline drain left space for something quieter. Focus, not fatigue. I snapped the binder closed. The click was louder in my head than it was in the air, like a case finally sealing. I looked straight into the camera on my porch for a beat, because the audience on the other side of that lens isn't just watching a story, they're measuring themselves against it. If you were standing in my shoes right now, if your HOA tried to play cop on your porch, would you reveal your badge or keep your cover, and let them dig deeper? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what you do in that moment. Your stories matter more than their threats. By 7:23 a.m., the SUV was on a tow truck. The magnetic decals looked pathetic once the truck took authority out of the angle. Karen's clipboard sat on the curb, abandoned, a little god without believers. The tall one refused to look at me as they guided him to a sedan. The shorter one looked only at the ground. I moved to the edge of my lawn and knelt where they'd photographed the dead patch months ago. You couldn't see it anymore. The grass had healed over. I pressed my palm against the blades and felt the warmth. That's the thing about living things. Give them air and light, and they grow past the spot where something died. Neighbors exhaled in a chorus. You only hear when people remember they can breathe. Somebody clapped once awkwardly, then stopped, unsure if it was allowed. I turned, nodded, and that was permission enough. Hands came together soft and real, not for me, for themselves. I stood and looked down the street where the fake cops had always crawled slow to be seen. For the first time there was nothing to watch for. Just kids on bikes who didn't have to glance over their shoulders, and a veteran who wouldn't clutch a notice like a summons from fate. My phone buzzed. A message from Hayes: "We'll need your statement at 10. I typed back, "I'll be there." Then I added, "Send someone to talk to Mr. Reynolds first." Priorities. I walked back to the porch and picked up my coffee. It had gone cold. I took a sip anyway, because cold coffee after a long night has a taste you can't buy. It tastes like work paying off. There would be paperwork, courtrooms, depositions with long tables and longer questions. Karen's attorney would show up with a tie and a tone. The board would claim ignorance. The fake cops would call themselves contractors and pray at the altar of just following orders. And the so-called civil matter would get very criminal very fast. Good. I left the door open and let the morning in. I stood on the threshold because that's where you stand when one life ends and another one starts. And if your HOA has ever tried to turn bylaws into handcuffs, if they've ever made you feel small in your own home, write your story below. Tell me your city. Tell me your Karen. Tell me whether you paid for it or planned to. I read every one, and some of you are going to help me decide what I do next when we step into court. The notice on my door wasn't a fine this time, it was a war. Notice of intent to foreclose. Bold letters across the top, Karen's signature at the bottom. It was their boldest bluff yet, a nuclear option they thought would make me cave. But they didn't know the foundation they were standing on was already cracking. I held the paper in my hand, feeling its weight. Not fear, evidence. Another piece for the binder, another nail in their coffin. Neighbors saw it too. I caught Mrs. Hahn peeking out from behind her curtains. Mr. Reynolds gave me a stiff nod from his porch, as if to say he knew exactly what that paper meant. The neighborhood was watching, waiting to see if I would break like so many others. I didn't. I slid the notice into the binder under a new tab, foreclosure fraud, then poured myself a coffee and sat on the porch. Let them drive by. Let them see me calm. Predators thrive on panic. Take that away, and you make them nervous. That night, I did a slow loop past the clubhouse. Lights on, shadows moving. Karen at the head of the oak table, board clustered around her, clipboard in hand, lips curled in command. "We keep the pressure," I heard her say through the cracked window of my truck. "If we lose this one, the neighborhood falls apart. Raise the fines, block his access. He's only one man." She thought she was leading soldiers. She didn't realize she was giving me a confession, recorded, clear as crystal. The next morning, a new van appeared outside the clubhouse. White, unmarked, no plates, curtains drawn across the windows but not well enough. A camera lens glinted in the morning sun. They'd lost their fake police SUV, so they switched to surveillance. Karen wasn't retreating, she was escalating. By mid-afternoon the fallout began. 3 new notices, taped to 3 different doors. Reynolds, the young couple with the chalk drawing kid, Mrs. Hahn, each stamped in red. Failure to support HOA directives may result in forfeiture of privileges. That was her message to the neighborhood. You side with him, you pay. Divide and isolate. It was intimidation, pure and simple. I pulled those papers down myself. One by one, I peeled them off, folded them, and added them to my binder. When I looked up, I saw blinds snapping shut. Neighbors too afraid to open the door, too afraid to thank me. But I didn't need thanks. I needed them to see. Silence doesn't protect you, it only feeds the bully. That evening, I parked my truck across the street and watched Karen stride from the clubhouse to her SUV. She carried a folder under her arm thick with papers. She didn't notice me, or maybe she did, and thought I wouldn't act. Either way, her arrogance was a weapon I was happy to let her swing. I snapped photos, timestamps, license plate, folder in hand. Documentation doesn't blink. The following day, the so-called board sent me a certified letter, thick envelope. I slit it open at the kitchen counter. Inside were 20 pages of legal jargon, threatening immediate lien placement and foreclosure proceedings. They even had the audacity to highlight a paragraph that read, "Non-compliance may result in removal from property at the discretion of the HOA." I almost laughed. At the discretion of the HOA. They wrote those words like they carried the weight of law. They didn't realize law was sitting at my kitchen table, binder open, badge glinting under the light. Still, I played along. I marked every paragraph, highlighted every false claim, traced every forged signature. Their fake power was fuel for my real case. But the harassment didn't stop at paper. One morning, I walked out to find my driveway blocked again. This time not by the SUV, they'd lost that game, but by 2 sedans parked nose to nose across the curb. 4 of Karen's board members stood nearby, pretending to chat. Banker, realtor, the 2 yes-men. They glanced up as I approached, smugness dripping from every smirk. "Morning," the banker said. "Problem?" "Just wondering," I said, setting my coffee on the hood of my truck, "if blocking a driveway is one of your bylaws, or just another invention." The realtor snickered. "Funny guy. You're running out of options. Pay up, or move out. It's that simple." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "You're right about one thing, it's simple, but not for me, for you." Their smiles faltered. I picked up my coffee, turned my back, and walked inside. Every move they made, every intimidation tactic, only made them louder on my recordings, louder in my documentation, louder in the evidence file growing thicker by the day. By week's end, Karen sent her boldest shot yet, a letter thicker than any before, taped to my door in the dead of night. Final notice, property seizure imminent. They weren't just bluffing anymore. They were setting the stage for a spectacle, a public takedown. They wanted to humiliate me in front of the neighborhood, parade me as the man who defied the HOA and lost. But here's the truth they never saw coming. My deed wasn't like theirs. When I bought the property, it came with a buried clause, stamped with federal clearance from my bureau background. It gave me ownership rights that couldn't be touched by any HOA vote, any forged signature, any foreclosure scam. They were trying to steal something that was never theirs to touch, and the moment I revealed it, their empire of lies would crumble in front of everyone. I stood at the porch rail, looking out over the cul-de-sac, as the sun set behind the lake. Kids played, dogs barked, neighbors watered lawns they no longer believed they owned. And I thought the moment is coming, because escalation isn't strength. Escalation is desperation, and desperation makes people sloppy. I closed the binder, set my badge on top, and whispered to myself, let them try. It was a Tuesday night when Karen made her final mistake. The clubhouse lights blazed brighter than usual, spilling onto the parking lot, where SUVs lined up like they were preparing for a parade. Flyers had gone out that morning. Emergency HOA meeting, mandatory attendance. Neighbors filed in, murmuring, clutching their chairs like shields. They'd been threatened, fined, humiliated, but curiosity pulled them inside. Everyone wanted to see what Karen was planning. I knew she'd been building toward this moment for weeks, her grand finale. She wanted a spectacle. She wanted to drag me out in front of the entire neighborhood, zip ties tight, fake cops smirking, and announce to the world that nobody defied Lakeside Estates. So I let her set the stage, because a stage is useless without an audience, and tonight she had one. I walked in calm, binder under my arm, phone already recording. Karen stood at the front of the room in her immaculate white suit, pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescence. The board flanked her like nervous bodyguards, and at the back wall, the so-called HOA police leaned against the door, arms crossed, badges glinting like they meant something. Karen spread her arms, voice sharp enough to cut glass. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we deal with a cancer in our community. A man who refuses to follow rules, refuses to pay fines, and mocks the very foundation of Lakeside Estates. Mr. Davis, stand up. Dozens of eyes turned to me, some fearful, some sympathetic, some just desperate to see the drama. I didn't stand, I stayed seated, binder on my lap. My voice carried without effort. You wanted a show, Karen. Let's put on a show. Gasps, murmurs. Karen's smile froze for just a second. Then she snapped her fingers. The fake cops stepped forward, plastic zip ties dangling from their belts. Sir, you're under arrest for repeated violations of Lakeside bylaws, the tall one barked. Same line, same broken authority. This time I stood, slowly, calmly, my chair scraped back on the tile, echoing in the tense silence. I placed the binder on the table, opened it wide. Pages fluttered like wings. You've been busy, I said, my voice steady, letting it reach every corner of the room. Fines, liens, foreclosure notices, even impersonating officers. Quite the list. Karen laughed, brittle and loud. You think you can intimidate us with paperwork? The board has full authority. I held up the foreclosure notice. Authority, I asked, or forgery? I flipped to the next page. Bank records. HOA funds funneled into Wellington Community Services, your shell account. From there straight into your credit cards. Neighbors' money paying for your spa days and SUVs. The room erupted in whispers. Karen slammed her hand on the table. Lies, he's lying. I flipped again, voice rising just enough. Vehicle records. Your so-called police driving a landscaping company truck registered to your P.O. box. The tall fake cop shifted on his feet. The shorter one's face went pale. And finally, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the small leather wallet, and flipped it open. The gold shield caught the light. The room went silent. 15 years with the FBI, trained to deal with racketeers, fraudsters, and con artists who think uniforms make them untouchable. Karen's face drained of color. You can't. This is a private matter. I cut her off. This is a federal matter now. Right on cue, the doors at the back opened. Real agents walked in, plain clothes, badges out. Hayes led them, voice calm but firm. This meeting is over. Karen Wellington, you are under federal investigation. Step away from the table. The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, neighbors rising to their feet. Karen staggered back, shaking her head. No, this is my neighborhood. I built this community. You bled it, I said, my voice cold, and now everyone sees it. The fake cops were disarmed in seconds. Zip ties clattered to the floor, plastic toys that never had meaning. Hayes read Karen her rights as the board crumbled beside her, faces pale, excuses spilling like water through fingers. Neighbors surged forward, some in tears, some clapping, some just staring in shock. Mr. Reynolds leaned heavy on his cane, whispering, "It's over." I looked around the room, meeting their eyes one by one. No more fines, no more lies, no more fear. Karen was led out in cuffs, her white suit now a costume stripped of its power. The neighbors followed her with their eyes until the doors shut. Then the room erupted, not in chaos, but in relief, laughter, applause that had been locked in their throats for years. The applause in the clubhouse didn't sound like celebration. It sounded like air rushing back into lungs that had been held shut for years. When it finally ebbed, Hayes gave me a nod that meant, "We're not done." Justice doesn't end with handcuffs. It starts there. By 9:42 p.m., evidence boxes were stacked like bricks against the back wall. Karen was gone, the fake cops were gone, and the board had been separated for interviews in different rooms so their stories couldn't knit together. I gathered my binder, slid the pages back into order, and stepped outside into the night air. The lake threw back a thin glare from the clubhouse lights. Hydrangeas shivered in the breeze like they'd been holding their breath too. Neighbors filtered out, faces dazed, eyes bright. Mr. Reynolds hobbled over, cane ticking like a metronome on the pavement. "Never thought I'd see it," he said, voice trembling.
You were the first to say it, I told him. You just needed someone to say it louder. He snorted. Well, son, you didn't whisper. He wasn't the only one. A young mother with a stroller hung back until we were alone. They called my kids chalk graffiti, she said, shame and anger catching on the same hook. We paid because it was easier. It was never easier, I said. It just cost less up front. By 10:13 p.m., Hayes' team finished the first round. She joined me by the curb, arms crossed, eyes scanning the parking lot, like a chessboard that would still be dangerous until we put all the pieces away. We'll need formal statements, she said, and everything you've got on the financials. It's yours, I said. There's more in the county records on the deed. Clause you'll want to highlight. Her eyebrow lifted. Insurance policy, call it a leash. I nodded toward the clubhouse. I'll make copies. In the morning I'll walk them down. Make it early, she said. I want indictments tight. I didn't sleep much. At 5:58 a.m., the house creaked the way houses do after a storm leaves, settling into a calmer shape. I brewed coffee, laid out the deed copies, marked the clause that had been invisible to Karen until the light hit it just right. A federal overlay that insulated title in the event of malicious civil action, legal Kevlar. They'd fired a blank at steel. At 8:31 a.m., my doorbell rang. Not a raid, a neighbor. The realtor from 3 doors down, one of Karen's nodding board members, stood on my porch, eyes rimmed red, jaw slack with the kind of fear that finally looks like clarity. I didn't know it was. All that, she said. She ran everything. We just signed. You signed, I repeated. I didn't soften it. You read. Her face said everything. No, you'll have a chance to say that under oath, I told her, and you'll have a chance to make something right before then. Start with Mrs. Hahn. Bring her every record of every fine you voted to impose. Bring a pen. She nodded, tears threatening. She turned to go and then stopped. Are you going to run the HOA? I almost laughed. I don't want a throne, I said. I want the floor level. By mid-morning, word had moved faster than trucks. A temporary receiver was appointed by court order to take control of the HOA accounts. The bank freezes hit first like a trapdoor. Wellington Community Services, Karen's vanity conduit, went from spigot to dead pipe. The spa membership invoice bounced. The lease payment on her white SUV lit up in someone else's inbox with a red flag.
You're under arrest for repeated violations against Lakeside Estates bylaws, the tall one barked, his voice cracking as if authority came from volume alone. It was 6:02 a.m. I was still holding my first cup of coffee, steam curling into the cold morning air, when 2 self-appointed HOA police stormed my porch. Their dollar store badges caught the porch light, Velcro patches barely clinging to fake uniforms. One had plastic zip ties dangling from his belt like trophies. The other fumbled with a knockoff radio, spewing HOA codes that didn't even exist. They thought they had power. They thought the community would cower. But I'd spent 15 years facing real criminals, the kind who don't hide behind bylaws and forged paperwork. And as I stared at their cheap props, I knew exactly what they were. Imposters walking straight into a trap. This wasn't going to end with me in cuffs. It was going to end with them in federal court. If fake cops knocked on your door at dawn, what would you do? Comment below and subscribe to see how this takedown ends. They say peace and quiet is priceless. For me, it was worth every dollar I spent on this house. When I first moved into Lakeside Estates, I thought I'd found it. The kind of neighborhood you see in glossy brochures. Tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, a lake that glittered at sunset, as if the whole water's surface was painted in gold. Kids rode bikes without a care. Retired couples walked their dogs in the evenings, and on paper the homeowners association was supposed to keep it that way. But paper lies, and behind the bylaws, the fees, and the so-called community standards, there was something much darker. At first I kept to myself. I wasn't some loud neighbor blasting music at 2 a.m. I wasn't the guy letting weeds choke the yard. My place was neat, my fence solid, my driveway clear. Still, it didn't take long for the HOA to notice me. Or rather for Karen Wellington, the self-proclaimed queen of Lakeside, to make me her next target. The first letter arrived 3 weeks after I moved in. A bright yellow slip tucked under my front doormat like a snake waiting to strike. Violation notice, garbage can visible from the street. Violation notice, garbage can visible from the street. $75 fine, must be corrected within 24 hours. I laughed out loud. My garbage can had been out for maybe 15 minutes, waiting for pickup. I even had a timer set on my phone to roll it back in before heading to work. But this wasn't about trash, this was about control. That night I saw her, the woman herself. Designer jogging suit, sunglasses perched like she was shielding herself from paparazzi. She strutted down the street, clipboard in hand, stopping every few houses to jot down notes. My neighbor Jim whispered to me from his porch, "Careful with that one. That's Karen. She is the HOA around here." I gave a polite nod, but inside I filed the name away like evidence in a case. Karen Wellington. The fines kept coming. A month later, violation notice. Fence paint fading, $125 fine. Must be repainted within 10 days. My fence was 2 years old, cedar. Still fresh enough that it smelled like the lumber yard every time it rained. But according to Karen, it was bringing down property values. Then came the threats. A red slip taped right across my front door. Final warning, failure to comply with HOA standards will result in escalated enforcement action. Escalated enforcement. That's what they called it. What it really meant was harassment, and they didn't stop at me. Karen had her little crew, the so-called HOA board, a retired banker who liked to remind people he knew the law, a real estate agent desperate to keep property prices inflated, and a pair of neighbors who just wanted to stay in Karen's good graces. They walked the neighborhood like a pack, whispering about who belonged and who didn't. One evening, I came home to find 2 of them standing in my driveway, clipboard, camera, snapping photos of my lawn like it was a crime scene. I stepped out of my car. "Need something?" The taller one cleared his throat. "Just documenting violations." I tilted my head. Violations. Dead patches of grass against HOA code. I glanced down. One small spot maybe 6 inches across, where the summer heat had scorched the lawn. That was it. "Looks like a federal case," I said, my voice flat. His pen froze mid-scribble. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Let him wonder what I meant. From that day I knew what I was dealing with. A fake authority, drunk on power, trying to scare people into submission. But here's the thing about me. Fear isn't in my vocabulary. I'd spent 15 years working cases where real criminals used intimidation, forged documents, and fake authority to prey on the innocent. And I'd learned something crucial. The moment you let them smell fear, you're finished. So I didn't bend. I didn't pay a dime. Instead, I documented them. Every letter, every slip, every photo they took of my house. Karen didn't like that. She thrived on silence. Neighbors too scared to push back. When she realized I wasn't just ignoring her but collecting evidence, she escalated. That's when the so-called HOA police appeared. The first time, I thought it was a bad joke. 2 guys in navy polo shirts with iron-on patches that read community enforcement. They pulled up in a dusty SUV with magnetic decals slapped on the side, Lakeside Estates Security Division. They walked up my drive like they were about to raid a meth lab. One even had a plastic holster strapped to his belt with nothing in it. "Sir, we've had multiple reports of non-compliance," the shorter one announced, trying to puff out his chest. I leaned against my truck, and, "You need to settle your fines, or further action will be taken." "What kind of action?" I asked. The taller one glanced at his partner, then squared his shoulders. "We can place a lien on your property. We can restrict access to community facilities. We can..." "You can what?" I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. He stuttered. His partner shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to being challenged. I stepped closer, lowering my tone. "You boys even know what a federal felony looks like? Because impersonating law enforcement sure sounds like one." Silence. Just the buzzing of a cicada in the tree above us. Then, without another word, they turned and walked back to their SUV. But I knew they'd be back. See, Karen wasn't the type to take no for an answer. And when someone like her feels power slipping away, they don't back off. They double down. Over the next few weeks, the letters grew more aggressive. The fines ballooned into the thousands. Neighbors whispered about me at meetings, too afraid to take my side. Karen painted me as the troublemaker, the one ruining the neighborhood. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every move they made was playing right into my hands. Because in my line of work you learn to be patient. You let the criminals dig their own graves, and you make sure when the hammer drops, it's not just revenge, it's justice. And that's why I didn't stop them when they finally crossed the line. I wanted them to. I wanted them to show up at my door at dawn, waving their plastic badges and barking about HOA bylaws. Because the moment they did, the game would be over, and I'd be the one holding all the cards. Have you ever dealt with a neighbor or HOA that acted like they had police powers? What happened? Drop your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. The day they taped the $2,500 violation notice across my garage door, I knew Karen wasn't just testing me anymore. She was trying to break me. It was bold red ink this time, the kind meant to rattle you before you even read the words. The letter claimed I had committed multiple severe infractions against the standards of Lakeside Estates. The infractions, according to them: fence not in compliance with HOA color codes, unapproved modifications to driveway concrete, failure to maintain lawn in uniform community standards. 3 charges, 3 lies. My fence had been the same cedar it always was. My driveway, never touched. And the lawn, my God, it looked like a golf course compared to some of the patches around the block. But here's how they work. They flood you with enough fake violations that fighting each one feels like bailing water out of a sinking ship. Most people give up. Most people pay. I didn't. Instead, I peeled the notice off my garage, folded it neatly, and tucked it into the growing binder I kept on my kitchen counter. Every fake fine, every threat, every official document with Karen's signature, it was all going into my personal case file. By then the neighbors were starting to notice. Some avoided eye contact, scared they'd be next. Others whispered encouragement when Karen wasn't around. Like old Mr. Reynolds, the veteran who lived 2 houses down. He leaned against his mailbox one evening as I pulled in. "Don't let her scare you," he muttered. "She's been bleeding us dry for years. Somebody's got to stop her." I gave him a nod. Somebody will. The next week, things escalated. The so-called HOA police didn't just come by to bluff. They started patrolling. Every evening their SUV crept past my house at a crawl, headlights sweeping across my windows like search beams. They parked at the corner, radios hissing static, as if waiting for me to make a move. One night I stepped outside just as they rolled by. The passenger lowered his window. "Still ignoring those fines, huh?" he sneered. I sipped my water, calm, still impersonating officers. His grin faltered. He muttered something into his radio, then they sped off. But intimidation wasn't enough anymore. They wanted humiliation. 2 mornings later, I woke up to find a giant orange sticker slapped across my front window. "Property under enforcement review. Access restricted." Neighbors slowed their walks just to stare. Karen herself stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, hands on her hips, smirking like she'd won. That was the first time I spoke directly to her. I walked right up, sticker still in hand. "You do this?" I asked. She didn't even blink. "Your property is a blight on this neighborhood. We're within our rights." "Your rights," I said slowly, "end at the curb." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you're special. The board will bury you in fines. We'll foreclose if we have to. Nobody beats the HOA. I smiled, just enough for her to see it wasn't fear. "You should have picked a different neighbor." And I turned my back on her. When intimidation didn't break me, Karen turned to slander. At the next HOA meeting, she stood at the front of the clubhouse, waving a stack of papers like holy scripture. "This homeowner," she declared, pointing toward me in front of 24 neighbors, "has refused to comply with over 15 violations. He's dragging down your property values. If he wins, we all lose." Gasps, murmurs. Some heads turned toward me. Others dropped in silence. I raised my hand. "Mind if I respond?" Karen smirked. 2 minutes. I stepped up,
voice even. Every single violation you've issued against me is fabricated. I've documented them all, and when the time comes I'll be showing that documentation to people who actually enforce the law. Karen cut me off. Enough, you're wasting everyone's time. But the seed was planted. A few neighbors caught my eye, nodding ever so slightly. They were scared, yes, but they were listening. If your HOA slapped a giant violation sticker across your home, would you pay the fine, or fight back? Tell me in the comments. The final straw came one Thursday morning. I was heading out for work when I found their SUV parked sideways across my driveway, blocking me in. The same two fake cops leaned against the hood, arms crossed, smug grins on their faces. Going somewhere? The tall one asked. I clenched my jaw. Move the car, not until you pay up. Board's orders. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You boys are playing dress up. And when this ends you won't be laughing. The shorter one chuckled nervously. Big words for a guy about to lose his house. I looked him dead in the eye. I've seen cartel lieutenants with more backbone than you. Something in my tone made his smile vanish. Without another word they climbed back into the SUV and drove off. But that stunt told me everything I needed to know. Karen wasn't stopping. She was escalating towards something bigger, something that would cross the line completely, and I was ready. Because every trap they set for me was really a trap I was setting for them. Weeks of harassment boiled into one night, a pounding on my door at midnight, neighbors' porch lights flicking on as the HOA police shouted through a bullhorn, "Open up, you are in violation of community code." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I watched from the darkened upstairs window, camera recording every second. They rattled my doorknob, flashed their plastic badges, barked into their radios. After 15 minutes they left, thinking they'd scared me. But all they'd done was give me more evidence. By the time dawn came, I knew exactly how this was going to end. Karen thought she had me cornered. But the truth, she had just walked herself into the biggest sting of her life. And I was the one pulling the strings. What would you do if neighbors dressed as police tried to block your driveway and shout orders at midnight? Let me know in the comments. I read every one. The night before everything flipped, I sat at my kitchen table with the binder open, pages fanned like a deck of cards, yellow slips, red warnings, photos of my offenses, and those ridiculous orange stickers. 11:47 p.m., the house was quiet. Outside, Lakeside Estates slept under porch lights and perfect hedges. Inside, I laid out evidence like dominoes and pictured how they'd fall. I started with the SUV. I'd memorized the plate on their security division truck the first time they crept past my window. I ran it through a database most people don't know exists. The registration didn't belong to any licensed security company. It belonged to a shell landscaping business dissolved 2 years ago. Address redirected to a P.O. box Karen used for board communications. I slid that printout under the paperclip labeled VE-KISS. Next, the badges. I froze a frame from my doorcam. The tall ones patch read Community Enforcement. The eagle logo crooked. The stitching rough. I zoomed in. The barcode was a prop house catalog reference number. I circled it with a pen and wrote one word in the margin, fake, and then the money. I traced fine payments from neighbors who were too scared to fight. Bank statements, HOA emails, the online portal. Karen insisted we use. A portion of every fine bled into a consultancy account under Wellington Community Services, Karen's maiden name. From there it disappeared into personal credit lines, a luxury gym membership, and an invoice from a company that sells custom SUVs with magnetic decals. I printed the flow, line by line, like a vein map. Paper doesn't lie. By 12:16 a.m., the outline was clear. This wasn't about grass height and fence stain. It was a racket, and the police were muscle. They thought they were running the neighborhood. They had no idea what kind of neighborhood I come from. I pulled the small scuffed leather wallet from the drawer, the one I never leave on the counter, never flash unless I have to. I flipped it open with my thumb. The gold shield caught the kitchen light. The ID beside it carried a name, The board never bothered to Google, because bullies don't expect resistance, they expect obedience. The air in my kitchen felt different the second the badge touched it, like the room remembered who I was, even if the HOA pretended not to. 15 years in the bureau teaches you the smell of a con, you learn the rhythm of it. It starts with a whisper, there's a fee, a rule, a way we do things, and ends with a crowd too ashamed to admit they were robbed. I closed the wallet and placed it on top of the binder. No more whispers, no more midnight bullhorns. Tomorrow, they would knock. Tomorrow, I would answer. It was 5:41 a.m. when I woke to the crunch of tires on gravel outside. Dawn was just a bruise on the horizon. I showered, dressed in a grey sweatshirt and jeans. I set my phone on the porch rail, camera on, angle wide. I made coffee. I let steam curl into the chill because details matter. Timestamps, temperature, body language, predators study. I didn't open the door when they rang the first time. I waited for the announcement, the one they practiced in front of a mirror. Sir, you're under arrest for repeated violations against Lakeside Estates bylaws. The tall one barked at 6:02 a.m., just like we knew he would, as if louder meant real. I opened the door halfway. The porch light washed their badges so they'd gleam for the camera. The tall one gripped his plastic zip ties. The shorter one fumbled his radio, whispering into dead air. Copy, copy, subject at the door. Violations, I said, tasting the word. Spell it. The tall one blinked. What? Spell what you're charging me with. I took a slow sip of coffee. I'll wait. He looked at his partner. The radio huffed static. Karen's white SUV idled at the curb, driver's window down, her sunglasses catching the first light. She was smiling. I let her. Step outside, the tall one ordered. Hands where I can see them. I stepped fully onto the porch, calm, loose shoulders. My voice steady enough to set a metronome. Before we go any further, I said, let me show you something. I didn't reach for a weapon. I reached for the binder. I laid it flat on the porch table, flipped to page 1, the plate trace, page 2, the fake badge barcode, page 3, the bank flow. Their eyes flickered like animals catching a reflection. They didn't understand. You've been busy, the shorter one sneered, but there was a tremor. Busy, I said, is a kind word. I held their gaze until they had to look away. Impersonating officers is a felony. Extortion is a felony. Wire fraud is a felony. And since you really like the word violation, you're about to learn what it means when the law uses it. The tall one laughed, but it came out thin. You think this scares us? This is a civil matter. HOA business. Civil. I tipped my head toward the camera. Say it again. For the recording. He glanced at my phone, then back at me, and for the first time I saw doubt climb his throat. Here's how this is going to go, I said, my voice dropping just enough for them to lean in. You're going to stand there and listen, because the next words you hear are not going to be from me. They're going to be from people who can actually put you in a room where you won't see a sunrise for a while. The shorter one shifted. Who do you think you are? I let the silence stretch like a wire between us. Then gently, I set my coffee down and opened the wallet. The badge faced the morning, the seal shone, names and numbers that matter stared back at them. I didn't need to say the letters. I saw it land in their eyes all the same. The porch got a degree colder. Karen's SUV engine revved. The sunglasses turned away, then back. Her smile was gone. You threatened foreclosure, I said evenly. You blocked my driveway. You plastered my windows. You told the neighborhood you could arrest me. You took their money. You laundered it through a fake consultancy. You bullied a veteran into paying for a fence he didn't need. You padded invoices. You forged board minutes. And then, because greed always overreaches, you dressed up as law and knocked on the wrong door. The tall one's throat clicked when he swallowed. The radio crackled. Empty. I'm going to make this simple, I said. Walk down those steps. Get into your vehicle. Wait. We're not leaving, the tall one said, but the words were no longer sure of themselves. You will, I replied, because you want to hear the rest of this from someone in a suit, not from me in a sweatshirt. I tapped the phone screen once. A countdown began that only I could see. You have about 90 seconds. I didn't slam the door. I left it open and walked to the kitchen. Let them stand in the chill of their own choices. I dialed a number that isn't in any neighborhood directory. Morning, a voice answered. No hellos, no pleasantries. Confirming a package. I said, 2 males, 1 female facilitator. Ongoing fraud, possible, impersonation, recording live, copy, units 2 minutes out, local notified. I hung up and stepped back onto the porch. The taller one had backed toward the top step. The shorter one avoided my eyes. Karen's SUV had crept halfway down the block, then crept back. She was calculating exits and finding none. Listen carefully, I said to the pair on my porch. Because I'm done repeating myself. Nobody here is special. Not because of a title on a clipboard, not because of a parking space marked president, and certainly not because you printed an eagle on a patch. The only thing that makes you special is the number of people you've hurt, and that number is high. From the cross street, I heard low tires on asphalt, not sirens, not yet. When you're trained, you can tell who's coming by the sound they don't make. The tall one heard it too. He had the look of a man realizing the fall isn't the worst part. It's the moment right before, when you're still on the edge, and the ground refuses to care. Karen stepped out of her SUV finally. This is harassment, she shouted, but her voice didn't have the ring of a bell anymore. It had the tin of a can. We have the right to what? I asked, turning my head slowly toward her. To lie, to invent codes, to fine a widow for a flower pot, to threaten a lien for a child's chalk on a sidewalk. I pointed to the camera. Say it again. Say you have the right. She hesitated, swallowed, lifted her chin. We have authority. You have none, I said, and for the first time I let a little steel show. Not the kind you've been pretending to, and you're about to learn that the law doesn't care how many signatures you collect if the ink came from fear. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked over my shoulder to the sound approaching. 2 unmarked sedans eased around the corner, quiet as early tide. A neighbor's curtain twitched. Mr. Reynolds stood in his robe, a silhouette in his doorway. He lifted a hand as if to bless the moment. The sedan stopped without screech or flash. Men and women stepped out in plain clothes, coordinated without matching. The lead agent, Hayes, met my eye without a smile, because this wasn't a moment for smiles. She nodded once toward the porch, then another set of eyes swept the street, clocking exits, watching hands. Morning, Hayes said to me, then shifted her attention to the tall one. Names. They tried to speak at the same time, voices tripping over each other. Hayes didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Authority is something you either have or imitate. Theirs was always a costume, hers was the air. Karen tried to wedge herself into the conversation. This is a private neighborhood. We are within our, ma'am, Hayes said. Just that, and the word had weight. Stand by. The shorter one lifted his hands, just a little, as if by instinct. The tall one's jaw flexed. We're security, he said, going for the last scrap of legitimacy. Board hired. We have a contract. Hayes didn't look at the badge. She looked at his shoes. The details that tell truth. You do not have law enforcement authority. You used the word arrest. You attempted a detention. That's a problem. She turned to me. You've been recording. From the doorbell to now, I said, plus documentation of fines, payments, forged minutes, shell accounts. She nodded. We'll take it. Karen found anger again, and tried to wear it like a sash. This is an overreaction. This is a dispute about neighborhood standards. Hayes didn't sigh. People like her save sighs for after. Ma'am, please step to the curb. Karen didn't move. The tall one did, but it was because his legs took him there before his brain could. The shorter one whispered, we didn't know. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession you give to the ceiling when you're alone. I stepped off the porch and stood on the walk. Neighbors had edged closer, pretending to water plants that didn't need it. Mr. Reynolds came down his steps, slow, careful, hands shaking more from memory than age. He looked at me like a man seeing the end of a long winter. Is it over? He asked, voice barely a breath. It's starting to be, I said.